Let's now create a table using a Java program. Of course, practically we never do this. Generally, you create a table using a script file and run the script directly on your DB client, such as the browser console we have for H2. And just for the sake of demonstration, create the table using the program. So I'm going to right click on my package and I create a new class and I'm going to call it as create table. Let's also include public static void main, click finish. Let's get rid of this to do and first create a string SQL equals to a command that we want to execute. Let me full screen this editor. Instead of typing the complete command over here, I'm going to type the command in a text editor and then copy and paste that over here. So I opened Visual Studio Code. You can use any text editor you want. I just want to type in one go and then copy paste the command over here. So I'll type here create table. The name of the table I want to create is called products. I open and close the bracket and the columns go something like this. Let's have an ID is going to be of a type called int primary key, and that's mandatory anyway because of primary key. Let's also have a column for name of the product. Let's call it as varchar of, say, for example, 100, and it is mandatory, so let's say not null. We can also type here some description. So I can say varchar of, say, 255. Let's also have a column called category, a varchar of, let's say, for example, 100. And one last thing that we want to have is the price of the product. Let's make it of type double. And now I can copy this and then come down over here. And then when you paste it, you will see that Eclipse automatically adds the necessary new line character, tab character, and so on. So this is a nice way of adding it. Otherwise, I have to type all these things in Eclipse manually. Of course, new line characters or tab characters or the spaces, they don't actually matter. But at least I had to do all those things. That would be a scope of errors. Anyway, I have my SQL command ready. And now I want to execute this command against the DB that we have. Unlike the previous case where I used to throw the exceptions, this time I want to handle the exceptions. Java 7 introduced a nice feature called auto closing of resources. For example, if I open a DB connection, behind the scene, the DB connection would be making use of some native APIs, which means that you are actually making use of some code written in C++, which may have used some memory areas which are not going to be released if you're not closing the connections. It is not only applicable for connection, but also for other type of interfaces like statement or result set, etc. So the best way to handle this would be to use a try block, but it's called try with resources block. So the try with resources block contains now a round bracket and then a curly bracket. So this is where you're trying out all the statements, but this is where you're declaring variables which are automatically closed when you exit this try block. The try block may also have an associated catch block if you want to catch and handle the exceptions, or you may even have a finally block, which is typically not required because the whole idea of having this is to automatically close, and the only thing in the finally you would do is to close the resources. So we don't need to write the finally anymore. So in this case, I'm going to put a catch block and say any exception is there, give it to me. I would like to log them. And typically you should use a logger for logging, but this time I'm going to simply say system.err.println of ex. So whatever the ex object is there, I'm just going to print it out. This bracket is where I would like to open the connection as well as declare few other variables. So I'm going to expand this, and then inside that I'm going to write here connection con equals to dbutil.getConnection. Connection needs to be imported, so let's just import it from java.sql. Now you see it's not going to give you any error because this is where you are trying to open a resource, and at the end of this try catch block it automatically gets closed if it is open in the first place. Now that the connection is ready, what we want is an object that is capable of executing this. Now remember, this is an SQL command and the command has to be executed on the server. That means we only have to supply this particular SQL command to the backend, which is H2, and H2 will take care of executing. So the actual command is not executed over here. So this being a string, and string doesn't have any functionality to pass this to the underlying DB, we need a specialized object, and that object is called statement. So statement is an object that represents a way of executing or passing the SQL command to the backend server and probably retrieving the return value from the server. For example, in case of a select statement, you may wish to get some records back over here. So let's type here statement stmt equals to con.create statement. Statement needs to be imported from java.sql, not from java.beans. Anyway, you can also press Command Shift O to automatically import that. And since there is a ambiguity between java.beans.statement and java.sql statement, we have to resolve that. So of course I have to select the java.sql.statement. And now we have a statement object that is capable of sending this SQL command. And all I have to do here is to say the same thing by typing stmt.execute. And you can see that there are many execute variations. Number one, execute that takes the SQL command. So there is an execute. There is an execute batch which can allow multiple SQL statements to be executed at one shot. So instead of visiting the server again and again and again, we can collect all the SQL commands as a batch and then send it across at one shot. There is an execute query. This is used only for select statement and not for anything else. And then you have here execute update, which can be used for insert, update, or delete statements, which are called DML statements. So we're going to see them later, but for the time being, I can use the execute function and supply this SQL command. So the SQL command is going to be executed on the server. So this is only going to send it across via the connection object. Once the execution is successful, it will come back without a problem. There is no exception, so the try-catch block is over. So statement gets closed, connection gets closed. So any resources that a C++ code would have used behind the scene would now be released. However, in case if there was any exception during the execution of this SQL command, probably because you don't have the permission, you're not the right kind of user, or there is a syntax error in your SQL command, or for whatever the practical reasons you got an error, this statement would throw an exception. That is what is going to be handled, and you're coming out of the catch block. Once again, because you're coming out of try catch block, both statement and connection get closed. So you don't have to manually close them. So if everything is okay, I want to give a message here that the table got created. So I'm going to type here system.out.println, and then I'll type here table created. Save it. If there is a problem, we have this system.error.println. If there is no problem, I'm going to get this table created. So for the first time when I run this code, since there is no problem in this particular SQL command, I hope there is no problem, this should be expected. However, if I run this second time, because the table already exists in the DB, this will now be a problem, and the system.out.println will be skipped, goes into the catch block, and then it's going to print this one. So let's see what happens. I'm going to select run as Java application. As you can see, it says table created. So we can go back to the browser, go to the H2 console. I have opened this for quite some time. I may have to do a refresh. And when I do a refresh, it says, hey, you have been logged out, so log in again. I click on connect. And now you see there is a table called products. If I expand that, you see that there is an ID. ID is an integer, not null. Name is varchar. All the data type that I have given have taken automatically. The primary key comes as an index over here. Everything is taken automatically. Of course, I can also click on this and automatically a select star from products comes up. I execute this by clicking the run button, and you see it says that there are no rows. However, if I go back and then run this code again, and this time it's going to fail because the table already exists, and I should see an appropriate error message as well. So I'm going to right click and say run as Java application, and you should see an error that says table products already exist, SQL statement failed. So I hope you understood the concept of opening a connection or statement inside a try with resource block. How do we execute a create table command, although generally we don't execute create table commands, but in some rare cases where you may have to read these commands from a text file and then execute and get the job done, you may have to do that. In the next lecture, let's see how we can insert record into the table that we just now created.